Welcome to Coming from Left Field, where we have conversations about politics, books, and current events with your host, Greg Godels and Pat Cummings. If you are a single adult with no children and live in Atlanta, Georgia, a living income is $55,000 a year. That includes food, housing, transportation, and health care. It does not include eating out at restaurants, vacations, leisure activities, or saving money for unexpected expenses. If you are a fast food or barista worker in Atlanta, Georgia, your average annual wage is $30,000, roughly $25,000 below the living wage threshold. So, the next time you're at an Atlanta Starbucks and order a white chocolate mocha latte, ponder that the barista is being paid only slightly more than half of a living wage. Let's discuss. Well, warm greetings all. We are here with as I said when I was off camera, the largest group of people we've ever had on one podcast. So we get some sort of award for this today, Greg, having three guests. And so let me introduce our guest to you. Lorri Nandrea, Dr. Nandrea, is the co-author of the book Square Up, or the
Co-editor.
editor of the book Square Up. And you were with your colleague, Tony, right next to you, also the author. Tony, we've had you on before talking about some of your books. And we because this is dealing with labor, it's a collection of 16 essays specifically to labor. We thought we would bring back friend of the show, Chris Townsend. Chris, you've been on a couple of times, actually talking about a few of the books that were published by International Publisher Company that Tony is the
There you go,
runs
Pat.
or manages or bosses people around. I don't know. You'll have to tell us that, Tony. This is going to be fun. I guess this would be the best possible panel we could get together to talk about what is going on with labor in our time of the second Trump administration. And so, welcome to our show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Good.
Thanks.
And no one's snowed in on the East Coast. You are all, Lorri. You're in Maine. You're in the mix of it. Are you guys all bailed out and got through that?
Snow's piled up around us, but it's receding and no new snow is falling. So
Okay,
spring is on the
good.
way.
Tell us about your book. Tell us about what's going on with this new book. Tony, you want to do an intro, or either one of you? Lorri, can you give us some background?
I guess I'll start. So the genesis for this book really started with the need for, at least from a international publisher's business perspective, we've been trying to deliberately and consciously expand the catalog. I think everybody knows that International Publishers has a long and vibrant history of publishing left, labor, radical books. Of course, Chris has done a great job of promoting William Z. Foster's American Trade Unionism and has written a foreword for another one of the books about Foster, Arthur Zipser's biography of Foster. And I think we're all familiar with Philip Foner's 11-volume history of the American labor movement. And so I think the initial genesis was to start a conversation with those of us on the left progressive trade union movement about the labor movement today and what it would take to fight back against this onslaught, this war that has been waged against the labor movement due to the Trump administration's attacks, but also the fight back that has also grown somewhat spontaneously and somewhat through the organizing efforts that have been taking place with the Amazon workers, with Starbucks workers, and other workers across the country, students, trans workers, and those types of folks. And so we wanted to pull together as many activists and organizers, rank and file trade union leaders as possible to initiate this discussion that really became the genesis for Square Up. And I have to really give a shout out to Lorri because in a lot of ways it was her relationships that really pulled together these essays. And so with that, I'll pass it over to her. How about that?
Okay, well, that was, uh, certainly a good, well captured in terms of sort of the origins, and just in the wake of the re-election of Trump, this urgent sense of needing to figure out, how the labor movement could not only try to protect, the gains that had made, somewhat during the Biden years, but also continue to fight forward and not be, crushed by the second Trump um, administration, and also how it can lead the rest of the working class forward in this era. And I guess I'm a restless soul, and I've moved around a lot, and I've lived in a lot of different parts of the country and worked a lot of different jobs and met a lot of different people. And so, I just reached out to them and asked them if they would be interested in contributing. Tony and I, made some suggestions about what might be good topics, or if people wanted to suggest something else, and it grew from there.
And I said I like to always get some background on people before they come on the show. Laura, you got an interesting background. I mean, you received a PhD in English from Northwestern, which is a big deal. That I mean, every time I walk into Northwestern University on campus, I get these angels singing about what a academic wonderful academic place that is. You moved around a bit, ended up in Maine, and you are now spending a lot of time working on climate projects. And tell me about what you're doing now.
Yes. So currently, I work for the Maine Labor Climate Council, which is as a field organizer helping mobile home park residents organize to win lot rent stabilization ordinances, in some cases to form co-ops and buy their parks. That's a wonderful thing when that can happen. We also help connect them to programs with weatherization and heat pump. And that sort of is our climate foot in things, and help connect the people to union contractors to install heat pumps as well, and help with weatherization.
Let's get to you, Chris. You are the salty dog of the group here. Like I said, I can call you a salty dog, can't I?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've been at this. This is year 47 for me in one union or another, primarily UE and Amalgamated Transit Union, a couple others as a member. So yeah, and thanks for having me.
And you've done 5 decades in the labor movement. You retired, and after you retired, it seems like that's when you really got your chops. I mean, you started doing a lot more organizing. You and I called you a salty dog because that was kind of a joke because you do some support union salting with Starbucks. Maybe you could chat with us a little bit about what does that mean to be
Sure.
to be salty training?
Yeah, I mean, salting is just a slang for a worker who would take a job at an employer with a pretty good idea that their mission was to organize a union, or at least see if one could be done. So I was a salt in the 80s in a couple of shops that I was in, and then through my career, many unions will dabble in salting to pick up the pace of whatever their organizing may be. And then I guess when I was at ATU, uh, I didn't plan it this way, but we ended up starting an organizing school, the Inside Organizer School, and then it was the folks around that school, of which I was one, that then we launched the Starbucks Workers United movement, and that has gone uh, literally into the stratosphere by any comparison to anything else. Not done yet, for sure. So anyway, salting is a lot of what I do. I was arranging a salt the other day for masters, mates, and pilots for the union of Jeremy Hope, one of the contributors to the book. So let's hope for that.
Let's get back to Tony and Lori's book. I went through and pulled out maybe 60, 70 facts from your books that I thought was rather interesting. One I incorporated into the introduction of this podcast, which was I didn't was unaware of this, but that it was looking at the what is considered a livable wage in different parts of the country. And you mentioned in the Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, a living wage. Well, let's take specifically Georgia is about $55,000 a year, and that's for just the basics. That's not for vacation, saving, so forth. And if you go into a Starbucks or a fast food place in Georgia, and you look at the person that's waiting on you, their average annual income is about $30,000. So they're literally making just a little above half of what is required for a living wage. Not around the edges, not 90%, 55%. They're making 55% of what a reasonable living wage is for people in this area. And if that tells it all. I mean, we've this inequity of our wages and of our economy is getting to be a crisis. I don't know. What do you say about that?
I think that if we don't find some way, whether it's grassroots organizing, whether it's union organizing, whether it's mass protest, people taking to the streets, I think what the Starbucks workers are doing by organizing for power in the workplace, I mean, that's where it's got to start. One of the things that I always tell young organizers when they ask me, I say, if you really want to change the world, start where you work. And I think that's what we've got to do, And so if that is indeed the case, that Starbucks workers in Georgia max out somewhere in the $30,000 range, it's an abysmal condemnation of the capitalist system and the where how the minimum wage has really betrayed working class folks in the United States. I mean, I don't have the most up-to-date figures, but if I'm not mistaken, if minimum wage had kept pace with inflation, it would be somewhere in the ballpark of $24, $25 an hour right now. And that doesn't include benefits, health care, vacation package, maternity, paternity leave, those types of things that are just should be commonplace if we lived in any sense of a civilized society. And so, but the only way we're going to get those things is if we continue to build power and challenge power in the workplace, because that's where it's got to start. And so I really got to tip my hat to those Starbucks workers everywhere that are challenging power in the workplace and the Amazon workers, etc. Like a lot of other folks, I started my activist career as a salter in a shop. It was an AT&T subcontracted call center back in the 1990s. So, I mean, I think we've all got to put in the time to organize. And if you haven't experienced firsthand the fear and intimidation tactics that the boss is going to try to use to destroy organizing campaigns, that's something that we've all got to come to terms with, because in our country, organizing right now is very, very difficult. And so that's part of the reason why we made this book, is because we wanted to provide some of these grassroots examples of how people are organizing, and hope that they lead to more successes, moving forward, pathways to success.
Greg, what do you think? You weigh in on this. What are
Yeah,
your
I,
thoughts?
I, I think the book tactically has a lot to offer. I mean, there are a lot of examples of people that are fighting to get a union and different ways to approach that. Of course, there would be many ways to approach that. We know when the failures are because we've been failing for a long time in building the trade union movement. And we have to scratch our head and say, why is that? But what I find a lack of a strategic picture coming out of the book, which I wish were there, because the book is it's an honest book in the sense that it wants to bring labor back into the picture for the left because it's been absent for the left for a long, long time. So that's a contribution of the book. But I think what stands in the way is there's no really sharp and honest assessment of the existing labor leadership in the AFL-CIO and not a really sharp and concise and deep assessment of its partner in the Democratic Party. And I'll pick on the Bill Fletcher essay in particular, which I thought there's a kind of distasteful metaphor to begin that essay about Barbarossa and the Soviet Union and a long attack upon on the Soviets' failure to. It's gratuitous. I don't even know why it's in there. But anyway, he wants to say that and I'll quote him: "Labor becomes an anti-fascist movement, or it has no future." Is that what we really want to say is the labor movement? That's the agenda for the labor movement strategically? I mean, certainly the Trump administration is a big problem. I mean, a huge problem, and one that we have to. But should that be the only thing? Should that be the essential feature of building the labor movement today? When the reason we've got Trump goes back, and as Marxist, we want to go and see the history of that. Where does it come from? It goes back through the Obama administration, where there was very advanced labor legislation that was promised and then was dropped. I mean, we can see a continuation over a long period of time, even to the 80s, in the Reaganism period, of a feeble Democratic Party that never intended to really fight back on the Republican agenda, which results in a Trump. So I think it would have been a better book if it would have included some of that deeper critique of the key players in this story, and that is the Democratic Party and its relationship to labor, and the labor leadership as it currently stands, and its relationship to the working class, which frankly is a distant one, in my opinion.
Well, I don't think you're wrong. I do think that everyone that I am in dialogue with would like to see a big strategic, vision for the labor movement to move forward. And it's not, I'd welcome if know of something that I should read. But I don't think it's very clear to anybody, right? I think that, people are flailing around a bit and trying to figure out, what can we do? What should we do? What should we do and what can we do, which is not always the same thing. I think there's a very high level of awareness of, the opportunity for labor to lead right now, resistance and fight back, and a high level of trust and confidence in the labor movement, right? And I don't think there's if there is somebody that knows what we should do and can do, I would certainly like to have them in the sequel.
I got the same thought that Greg did. Is at times I'd read the book and I just get so depressed, but then other times there would be such good news with things. You look at Hakeem Jeffries. He is one of the absolute leading recipients of APEC money. I mean, he's in the pocket of APEC. He met in February. Hakeem Jeffries met with the Silicon Valley donors in bid to mend fences. He is really a huge part of the problem. And so I don't see the Democratic Party having any power in truly supporting labor as they probably should from their present leadership. But Chris, I'd like you to respond to this, though. You were
Sure.
very involved with this, with the organizing Starbucks workers. It started in 2022, and there were 250 stores that were union. And here we just are 4 years later, and it's almost just under 700. You know, you've
Yeah.
tripled the number of you. So there is positive things occurring, but is it enough, or what
Yeah,
do you
yeah.
say, Chris?
A couple comments. I appreciate the book. I wish Lorri, and good to know you, Lorri. I don't know you until now, but I wish Tony had told you that I existed when you started this, because he might have, I might have been able to assist in some way. Because when you mention a sequel, that's absolutely required, because this is a 500, 600 page book, not a 150 page book for sure, with what's going on and with even the available sources. And to your point, Pat, on Starbucks. Starbucks actually started significantly before that. Of course, it was a salting program, recruiting and sending people up to Buffalo. And one of the remarkable things, that it's a story that still hasn't been told, is that this book that I got back into print, working with Tony's predecessor, Foster's American Trade Unionism, this went with all 15 salts who were recruited to go into those first three stores in Buffalo. And I'm mystified why that isn't of any more interest than what it is. I mean, Foster
Mhm.
animated those young people. There were 12 that came from out of town, three that already lived there. And it exploded. We had no way of knowing that that was going to happen. You always hope for that as a union organizer, but off it went. And when the day comes, perhaps, that we do talk and collaborate, the facts will reflect that the two unions who've inherited Starbucks, Workers United initially, and now the Service Employees Union, at distinct junction points early in that campaign, they tried to kill that campaign because they had lost control of it. They were worried about it, had all kinds of phobias. Of course, the predominance of the folks who run those unions have little to no trade union backgrounds. And it opens up another discussion about what ails the labor movement, this administrative mindset that now permeates union after union after union. And I've written about this, and the phrase that I use with Starbucks is that, isn't it interesting that, of course, the company has spent, I think as time goes on, it'll eventually be $1 billion that they will have spent to try to crush that union. But the interesting thing is they can't catch it and they can't kill it. And actually, the two unions have likewise, tried that. They can't catch it and they can't kill it. And it represents a real vibrancy and a real liberated spirit of those young workers who say, we don't have anything to lose. We need an organization. We need more money. We need fairness. We need an employer that provides something like benefits. And I couldn't be more. I mean, that's a microcosm in an industry that's not. I guess no one would consider Starbucks the commanding heights of the economy, but you begin where you can begin. So I would appreciate that. That story needs to be told in a sequel. But the last thing, indulge me, Pat, on this. I did appreciate some of the chapters in the current book. I appreciated some of the stories of the Carolina Amazonians toughing it out. Erica Mead in the service workers in the South, and just the incredible abuse and torment that people are, forced to be subjected to. Jeremy Hopes, the Masters, Mates, and Pilots, I mentioned. I happen to know something about that. The Wisconsin story at the end by Jane Ann Morris, who's passed away now, but I thought that in many ways was the best chapter in the book, that really talked about the internal defects and corruptions of the labor movement and its relationship to the Democrats, that essentially took what might have been, it's the old story of what might have been an uprising that had gained some contagion outside of Wisconsin, like the contagion that we did catch with Starbucks. But yet the Democratic Party and the union officialdom and everybody was trying to funnel it into all these acceptable avenues, and it died. And I think that's another piece that can be enlarged on. So I appreciated the book, and I look forward to more, because this is vital in terms of getting into these actual day-to-day experiences out there. There's massive amount of organizing going on, but it's not driven by and large by the unions. It's driven by clusters of workers sort of self-organizing, pieces of unions, lower level staff and unions and whatnot. So thanks.
Yeah, and the Morris chapter was, I think, the best. I agree with Chris on that because I don't think she's to see she had any access to grind. I think she kind of lived that experience and saw it evolving, and then had no negative or cynical expectations of the labor movement or the Democratic Party. They were earned. They earned the cynicism. They earned the criticism of their actions as she saw them unfold. And that's said. And it needs to be said, if we look at the 30s, and that's why international publishers is so important because these have these great resources. And we look at when we really had fascism. There was no if, ands, or but. There were no debates. Is there fascism in the world? Is this right-wing trend fascist or not? It was fascist. And yet at the same time, the labor movement was fighting to grow. And people could have said, well, let's not rock the boat. Let's not let the AFL, let's just leave things alone. We don't need to develop a CIO. That's going to shake things up and divide our unity, etc. No, it actually added to it, benefited to unity because it built a stronger labor movement, a more powerful, more militant labor movement that could fight against fascism. And I was disappointed again in Fletcher's account because he says, oh, in Germany and Italy, the labor movement wasn't an anti-fascist. Of course it was. You've got to know that history to know that it was, in fact. What did he want him to do? But in any case, at the same time, Foster and Ford ran against Roosevelt, even though Roosevelt represented something that is so distant from what the Democratic Party is today. And again, our history, the history that International Publishers owns, I mean, they have it. No one else has it. That history tells us so much about how to fight today, in my opinion. So I vote for the sequel.
Your book kind of bummed me out because a couple of times you mentioned that 40% of union members voted for Trump. I'm just beyond the pale. But then a central theme of the book is that unions must organize the entire working class, not just the dues-paying members, and that they have to develop better systems to aggressively address the issues of this late state capitalism we find ourselves in. So how do you tell me about those two things that you're having 40% of union members voting for Trump, and maybe the union isn't the way in which we approach this change. I don't know. I really don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, I just throw out something from my recent experience with mobile home park organizing. In most of the mobile home parks, it takes us months to get to the point where the group is ready to go to the select board or the city council and sort of present demands and fight for that. In one, the town of Oakland, Maine, it took 2 weeks. Why? Because there are 5 union members live in that park and they know how to organize, right? They know what to do. They know how to keep people's confidence up, how to communicate, how to band together. They understand that numbers and unity are the way you win. They just had it. And so, it really impressed upon me, the skill set that union members bring to other working class groups and how absolutely crucial and important that can be. And I'll let Tony say.
Yeah, no, if I can, and I agree with Lorri 100%. And just to add to that, I was recently reading a report that for a lot of these MAGA voters or Trump voters, and I would include this 40% of union voters that voted for Trump, I would argue that they're not ideologically committed to the MAGA movement. What I would argue is that they are looking for community and that they found community in this group of people who were angry and tired of status quo politics. And for whatever reason, our union movement today, and there's fits and starts. Some are better than others, some are a lot worse than others, but for whatever reason, our union movement is not providing the community that people need to feel like they are a part of, that is able to provide the networks of support that people are looking for. And so, my generation is probably the last generation that grew up in what was called the union household, right? And so I can remember growing up and my grandfather reading to me out of Solidarity magazine, the union magazine of the UAW, because he worked at the Chrysler plant, right? But my generation is that last generation. The Chrysler plant doesn't exist anymore. The Ford plant doesn't exist anymore. The parts plants don't exist anymore. And so not only does that sense of community not exist, but the church groups don't exist anymore. The bowling leagues don't exist anymore. Those things that brought people community and a sense of belonging don't exist anymore. And so where do they find it? The only place that people are organizing, by and large, or the only place that they see people organizing, are these online communities of the right wing, these toxic online communities of the right wing. So we've got to find some way to counter that. And the labor movement, because it's under attack, because it's underfunded, because it's a shrinking portion of the overall total of the working class, I think has been on the defensive for so long, it's not sure or not confident enough in itself to organize those communities and to make people feel like they belong. And so I think we've got to figure out how to rebuild those communities, figure out how to win back people to a sense of working class identity. And I think that's the problem. That's the real challenge. Yes, we've got to educate. Yes, we've got to inform, but we've got to win people back to the idea of community, and the rest will come, I think.
Yeah, just a thought. I was a political director. I've had multiple careers in my long career, and one of them was the political director for UE. And when I retired and went back to the Amalgamated Transit Union, Larry Hanley was the president, and a very progressive individual. And I remember most folks wouldn't know this, but every significant union out there, a larger union at least, polls its own members. Some of them do it intensively. They spend a lot of money. They hire a lot of these consultants. The Democratic Party feeds these folks to the unions. And then they go out in all manner of way. And whatever we say about polling, there's an act to it, and there's frequently it finds what the result is, as much as we may not like to hear it. So union after union after union has polled their members. Now, this would have been the 2016 election, and Larry Hanley polled the Amalgamated Transit Union membership. And Bernie was polling third between the Republican, the Democrat, and the third. He drove forward with an endorsement of Hanley because it was the right thing to do, not because it was the popular thing to do. And he challenged the members of that union and he was embraced. He was a wildly popular figure. Yes, it was a political gamble for a guy like Hanley. But what I'll contrast that with is the current president of that union, who inherited that union when Larry Hanley dropped dead of a heart attack, very tragically. I wrote the current president of the Amalgamated Transit Union, John Costa. I wrote him an email the evening of January 6th, which, remind me, guys, what was that? 2021? Was it 2021, January 6th? The hordes, the barbarian hordes storming our capital. So I wrote the president of that union a message, and I said, John, this is not good. What if these folks had been storming our union headquarters? Or what if this had been coordinated in a better way? Or, all the what ifs that we all have thought about. And he answered me the following day with a phone call. Chris, yeah, that's important. That's important. And I had reminded him that I had a political background to educate the members, because that's the problem. None of these unions spend a nickel to politically educate their members. So his answer to me was very simple. We're going to expand our COPE program. That's the political giving program, almost exclusively to Democrats. Doesn't include any political education program. So if we polled the members of that union today, I'm sure we would find still a significant chunk of members totally confused, voting against their self-interest. In the last election, this is how Trump won a second time. So we have a real crisis within the leadership that will not lead, that will not face the reality. Isn't brave? Hanley was a brave guy. He said Sanders is the guy. This is the program that this union needs to move forward. And he took on that risk. We don't have a lot of labor leaders in this country that are willing to push forward like that. So it's folks like us, it's the left. What did Foster teach us? The left wing has to do the work.
Yeah.
Well, there has to be a left, right? I mean, there has to be a left in the labor movement, and that we ought to strive to create it. But to address what Pat said about Trump, is the Trump vote in the labor movement, it was there in the 30s. To go back to the 30s again, it was there in the 30s. The Black Legions, when they were organizing the United Auto Workers, Wyndham Mortimer's book relays it very well. Organizers would be found dead with a bullet cartridge on their chest to remind workers not to support the union organizing. But because they had people, the left, that was willing to push through and explain unionism, explain and build a union movement, build the CIO, that transformed people. That there was in the UAW, Tony, your family's from that. In the 30s and 40s, and 30s in particular, Southerners were coming up to work in the factories in Detroit, Southern whites, and they brought with them really, really, really backward ideas, but they had to be organized. Nobody threw their hands in the air and said, "Well, most of these people are rednecks from the South. We can't organize them." They said, "Well, organize the workers as workers, and that's the way they'll become better." We don't have that today. We don't have that kind of thrust from our union leadership. And I grew up in a union household, a working class household, but also in a working class community, a neighborhood where everybody in my block, everybody around my horseshoe worked in the mines or at a GM plant. And I can tell you, it was a mixed bag. We can't romanticize working people. I mean, there was a lot of backwardness in my neighborhood. You encountered it, racism and so on. But a union, when it's a functioning union with a goal, with a vision, that eats away and erodes that. That educates people. Like Chris says, it can't just be throw our money at the Democratic Party and tell them to vote for the Democrats when they put up such a poor image of what can be. But when 30s, when you had an image of what it could be like, people thought it through and they changed and they ended up voting for FDR, frankly, but for good reason, in many cases. That's gone now. I mean, it seems to me, if we want to have a vision, if we want to have a strategic look at the labor movement, we've got to factor all that in and try to find a way to recreate that vision in the labor movement.
Can I add just a little something to that also? And I think it's really important. And I don't think it's a either or. I think it's a both and. But I think we've got to have this third party electoral candidates where possible, not as spoilers or nothing like that, but where possible, DSA or Communist Party candidates or left progressive candidates where it's appropriate, and go from there. I mean, I know there's been a lot of DSA members that have been elected to local offices, but we should also acknowledge there's been CPUSA members elected to local offices this last round of elections, and we have an electoral conference coming up later this spring, a national electoral conference where we're planning to run several CPUSA members for local elected office. Here in the Missouri-Kansas district, we have comrades running for even state rep, and so I just want to put that out there that I want to acknowledge that I think it's a both and, not an either or.
I went back and listened to the podcast that you did with Greg and I, 100 podcasts ago, a couple years ago, and it was 100 years of the CPUSA, and you were looking at two of your books, Let It Tremble and The Cancer of Colonialism. That was a good podcast. I mean, I had no idea that Hudson was in in the middle of Oregon having, you know, tens of thousands of college students listening to him lecture, and how powerful and effective the Communist Party was in organizing and sustaining the momentum for unions into the 60s, into the 70s. Uh, is there any hope that our new mayor of New York and that there might be other people that can step forward and bring this coalition from a broader coalition of just union people to the complete population? I mean, we're ripe for somebody saying, "I want a billionaire's tax." Period. Elect me. I mean, I don't know, that's got to be polling at 70 to 80%, isn't it?
I mean, now is definitely the time to make that demand.
Yeah.
And I imagine that if there was a candidate that did make that demand, they would be very popular. And so, I mean, I think that where you find communist activists in the trade union movement right now, they're doing the best they can to build the broadest based unified movement that they can, and in very difficult conditions, whether it's in the South, the Southeast, Texas, in the Northwest, comrades are doing the best they can to build the movement with the understanding that every geographical location is different, and you have to kind of approach things in with that understanding, which I think takes us kind of full circle back to this idea of a volume two. I think Chris is absolutely right. I think this is something, Lori and I discussed some briefly. We were both probably a bit tired from putting the first volume together. But I think it's absolutely necessary because this first volume is maybe a bit East Coast heavy. And so if we expanded it more to the Midwest and West Coast with our contributions, maybe that would be a good way to expand it to a volume two. And so, these lessons are really important. And I know that there's definitely a lot of other contributions that we could welcome into a volume two.
And
Well,
Tony, one of the things that and may still, I'm sure there's still people around that will remember TUAD, which is not,
Mhm.
I keep referring to the 30s. That's in my time. And Communist Party was a big inspiration for TUAD and Labor Today, which
Mhm.
was a paper. Coming out of the high McCarthy era and having the audacity to try to organize a left in the trade union movement was a big deal, I thought. And I think the first Congress or conference around TUAD drew a lot of trade union members, a lot of people. They came out from hiding, in a sense, from McCarthyism and came together, and newer people came in. And it made a difference, I think, in the way the labor movement evolved in the 60s. And that's a more recent history. I'm sure there are people around that remember that and could contribute to that, or even the old back issues of Labor Today would be useful. My old friend, dear friend Fred Gabry, was a leader in that movement, and I just think that might inspire. You mentioned CPUSA trade unionists that are doing the best they can, but maybe if they had a vehicle like TUAD, they would do even more. I mean, that would help organize and direct and focus their work in a way that TUA did in its time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I have to say that Fred was actually a mentor to me when I was still a young whippersnapper. And I met him in the Chicago office in the late 90s. And one other important mentor to me was a black trade unionist, a crane operator by the name of Jim Wilkerson, who was one of the founding leaders of CBTU, the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that many of the leaders of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, the Coalition of Labor Union Women, during that formative period were leaders of the Communist Party. And so, if we're talking about that period of the U.S. labor movement, the Trade Unions for Action and Democracy you know, that story needs to be told. And if those folks are still around, we need to get those stories told. And so, absolutely.
Lori, do you think that in your work with mobile home parks, do you think people really have an understanding of what equity funds and these private equity funds are doing to the purchasing the mobile homes, real estate industry, assisted living facilities, taking over doctors' practices? They're absolutely horrible, and I don't see any media at all or anyone talking about how to curtail that, how that is contributing to a lot of our misery. What are your thoughts about that? Stick your head in an oven and turn the gas on, or
No,
I don't know. But
no, I'm so glad you asked that question because we really I mean the mobile home park residents understand immediately. I mean they know what's happening to them. There's absolutely no confusion or mystery about what's happening to them. It's interesting because I live right across the river from Jay, Maine, which was the site of a huge international paper strike in the late 80s, 1987. You probably have heard of it. It was one of the, big last stands of the labor movement. Right after Patco, and over 1,000 workers out on strike for 16 months. And they were crushed essentially. And so that memory is very proximate to everybody that lives in Jay. It's a small town. And as we were organizing the mobile home parks in Jay, people started to make the connection, this private equity buying these parks and like squeezing it for with no attention to maintenance, just as much rent as we can pay. It's like what happened to the mill, which is true. It's the private equity. It's like what private equity did to the mill because after the strike, and then they basically, ended up sort of squeezing what they could out of it and then selling it on twice, as these things happen, for something that's purely a cash investment for, investors. And so we had a event with our candidate Graham Plattner. If you don't know who he is, get him on your radar. We
mhm.
have big hopes for him. He came and he interviewed two people who were on strike from that union on strike and two of the mobile home park residents about what private equity is doing to the working class in this country. It was spectacular. I wish it was on TV that everyone could see, but it's exactly, this kind of problem. It has, the more we raise awareness, I think it's a very easy thing to raise people can put it together immediately.
Pat, can I interject? Lori mentions the chapter on Jay Main and Peter Kelman, who I don't know Peter, but I've kept up with him over many years, decades actually. I hope he's still going. And he details this international paper crushing of the United Paper Workers International Union. It's near and dear to me because I got thrown in the jailhouse in Ticonderoga, New York, in the IP mill there. That's a long story, but I lived in Albany and we were trying to mobilize to help this union. But here's the point that I want to make, and this is a point that Peter doesn't, he alludes to it in his chapter, but he doesn't really go into it. And should you guys move forward with a sequel, some of this needs to be delved into, and it's this. The leadership of the United Paper Workers International Union was a disaster. Let's say that again. The leadership of the UPIU union was a childlike, ignoramus disaster zone. Can I say it any more strongly? And it played out during that strike, and the members paid a horrible price for that. And then this became, and this is maybe another aspect of this, which gets alluded to other places in the current book, the good work that you guys have done. The paper workers eventually chose to put themselves out of their misery by essentially angling a merger, a union to union merger with the oil, chemical, and atomic workers. What a tragedy. OCAW, unlike many other unions, had something going for it and had some elements within it that wanted to fight. And the merger became a disastrous end of the positive OCAW legacy and the triumph of the UPIU because it was a larger union than that. And it was never really done. And a lot of folks like us on the left stood around, hooray, unity, unity, we're merging together, we're going to be stronger. Nothing of this sort, nothing of this sort. This was the destruction of a fine union and, sort of the melting into invisibility, a union that couldn't function, tragically, a business union that just UP, and it's tragic because the early unions, if anyone knows the history of the paper industry, were quite militant and quite well organized. That industry was not organized as widespread as it was by a bunch of guys sitting in their office smoking cigars, I can assure you. So, all these trade union questions are very complex. And, I appreciated Peter's piece in there because it reminded me of that. And there was just yet another, the UPIU disastrous international paper disastrous strike was a failed strike, was really a one of dozens of these Reaganite era disasters for us. But we, unless the left draws the correct conclusion from these things, they just become sort of like, well, it just wasn't meant to be. It was a valiant struggle. People tried. Yeah, the members did everything possible that they were asked to do. What the hell did the leadership of that union do? Look for all the easy ways out. I'm not speaking about the local union leadership. I'm talking about the tops. Their headquarters was in Nashville, Tennessee. So in any case, as you slice and dice this, there's an awful lot that we have to get into.
Any thoughts about immigration and the immigration struggles and how they might be incorporated into this? Is that too hot a topic to deal with? I mean, I think that singularly got Trump elected for sure. What do you think? They're exploited labor. They're necessary for our economy. We can't run without them, and yet there seems to be such great mendacity about how we respond and deal with them.
Well, you're heading in the right direction, and it's what's missing in the conversation is it gets caught up in xenophobia, hatred of the other and fear of the other, et cetera, et cetera. And on the other side, it gets caught up in a kind of ideology of everything is wonderful. All immigrants are to be embraced. They're great, and so on and so forth. So you've got these two unrealistic and totally disconnected from reality notions that kind of command the two sides. Where from a working class perspective, look, I mean, my immigrant grandparents came here basically to supply cheap labor, but it had to be framed in that context. So it wasn't as though this was our salvation. They came to Ellis Island and they were welcome. It's all bullshit. We all know it's bullshit. We were here because they wanted cheap labor. And if you can frame it in terms of corporations and class struggle, people might be able to understand it in a way that wouldn't catch them up in the xenophobia and the fear. But the labor movement's not doing that. Certainly the Democrats aren't doing that. They're not talking that language. So it is for the labor movement. It is an issue that the labor movement could be advancing and forwarding and adding an understanding of what it is. And in many cases, historically, immigration has been used to lower the standards of working people. I mean, that's one of the tools that's used by ruling classes. You can't just go blind to that. You have to acknowledge that, but then you have to explain why we're not in that period. We're not in that situation today. That's the role of militant trade union leaders, and we haven't, frankly, had any since the demise of the CIO in the early 50s. It's been a business unionism, and I think the heart of any real conversation about where trade unionism goes is that and it's in the book as well. It's in the book. The difference between class struggle unionism and business unionism. That's fundamental, and that will help people understand how to understand the immigration issue as an issue.
Lorri, I have a question for you. Is Grant Plattner? He's the oyster farmer, isn't he? Right. And really quite a remarkable fellow. But when he first started to run, wasn't it the Democrats that were trying to scuttle him with his going back and become a mercenary? And, I think he went back into the military as a private contractor because he was struggling so much. And I can the question would be when you get reasonably good candidates like that, it seems like the biggest hurdle they have to get over is Schumer and Jeffries. Am I right, or am I just babbling?
That is certainly a problem in this particular case.
Okay.
They'd like to see Janet Mills win, and Janet Mills is no friend to labor, and we strongly support Graham Plattner. Yeah.
Hmm. What's next, you guys? Lorri and Tony, any new authors or books that you are thinking you want to put on the radar for people?
Well, IP has got a exciting batch of new spring titles that are coming out. We are currently in the final stages of a Claudia Jones reader. I'm just waiting for some final edits from the editors of that collection. We've got a new collection on the CPUSA Women's Commission publications, Working Woman and Woman Today, that I'm just waiting for final approval from the author of that. We're reprinting some of Phil Foner's books from the 1970s that he initially published in 1976 during the 200th anniversary of 1776. And so now that it's the 250th anniversary, we're going to reprint We the Other People, Alternative Declarations of Independence, with a new forward. And then we also have the select writings of Abraham Lincoln and FDR with a new forward coming out. We're going to be reprinting Jews Without Money by Mike Gold later this spring. And so those are some of the new and back title, back issue titles that we have coming to print with new forwards. Personally, I've got a number of projects that I'm working on. But yeah, I think this conversation has been really helpful, and I think Lorri and I need to maybe once we get through the midterms, revisit this idea of a volume two, and aim for a 2027, maybe 2028 publication for volume two. It's one of the great things about a publishing house is there's no shortage of things to publish.
Right. Right.
So,
Well, you guys are a
yeah.
great team, and I bet you when you argue about punctuation and capitalization, Lorri generally wins those arguments, probably. I'm correct about that, right?
Yeah, we're
We'll,
a
we'll,
good
we'll
team.
definitely link to your international publishers. It's just a wonderful collection of books, and if you read heavily through your catalog, you will definitely have a different perspective on politics, and that's a good thing. So that's a good thing. Final thoughts, Greg,
Wonderful.
before we turn these
Well,
people
I
back
you
to
know,
the
I
cold East Coast misery of climate
yeah,
change they're suffering.
it's gonna be wonderful here in Pittsburgh in another couple of days. It's gonna be in the 70s, and I'm gonna be so happy, and I won't look nearly as pale as I look now, like I'm climbing out of a crypt. But I just want to say that international is so important. I mean, it's as a legacy. Tony, you really got to keep that legacy alive because I'm sorry, but Verso isn't going to get it. We're not going to develop a working class out of Verso's publications. And I must say, I admire Monthly Review in many cases, but they're not going to do it either. The only place it can come from to really educate working people is international publishers. And that legacy is so rich. There's so much in it that people can learn from. So I'm looking forward to all the books that are um, going to be coming out in the future. I'm excited about it, and I'll tell all my friends about them because I know they'll be wonderful books.
Good, good. Chris, final thoughts before we send everybody away?
Oh, well, anyway, thanks. And thanks for the book and the stimulation of all the different contributions. And, I keep busy with things. This week, this is the third Zoom I've already been on. I'm going to do a fundraising Zoom tomorrow for a left labor group and an organizing Zoom on, I guess, Thursday. And then Friday, meeting with a journalist. Saturday, I have to run a union meeting. So, and I'm supposed to be retired.
Yeah.
There's no such thing for me. I'm not rich enough to give up, So anyway, I want to press on all the
Come
long.
on, you were a bureaucrat. You were a well-paid
Oh, that's right.
union
Yeah, I forgot about
union
that. Yeah.
bureaucrat. All those years.
And
That's how I got two pensions.
Spend it in a casino. Spend the money in a casino.
And when are you going to start having white hair? Don't tell me you color your hair. Jesus.
No, I don't. I don't know. My beard went gray, but my head it stayed in and it
Okay,
hasn't
okay.
turned. But no, I appreciate you guys in your program. Thanks for having me. And
Good. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate you all. Bye now.